All right. Well, it looks like we're going to get underway. Want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially our featured guest, Jim Cook. So good morning and welcome to TAO's Impact Series for 2021. This is the second in a series we're doing roughly quarterly for the year. We've created Impact as a year-long series of conversations and online content supporting our efforts to engage with the community on the themes of economic competitiveness, talent and culture, and digital transformation and innovation. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO, and I'm excited to kick off our first program on talent and culture with a conversation with the CFO of Orbital Insight and the founder of BenchBoard Executive Network. Today, I'm joined by Ruthie Ditzler, Marketing and Regional Program Coordinator at TAO. Should you have any questions or issues during the webinar, feel free to send either of us a private note through the chat. A couple of guidelines before we start. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a member of the TAO staff unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Ruthie under special events. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We'll ask you all to utilize the participant icons on your screen throughout the program. Please engage with us as well on social media during this call and throughout the day. And we appreciate all the social support, and you can see where to find us on this slide. Due to the limited time, we'll capture all questions in the chat, and any questions we don't get to, we'll make sure to get answered later in our online member engagement platform, Mobilize, where we'll just be following up with Jim if we don't get to any questions and ask him if he wants to provide some brief answers to any in written form. And Mobilize, for those who don't know, is TAO's member-only virtual community, and our guest will provide written responses there to any unanswered questions. If you have any questions about Mobilize or joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org. A huge thank you to JLL and to Facebook for underwriting the series. We appreciate their sponsorship and support. We invite you to join us at noon today as well. We'll have a panel on eliminating hidden bias in job descriptions with Bijou Menon, CEO of Fairhire, Cedric Gutierrez, professor at Bocconi University, and TAO's Cara Toronto. At 2 p.m., we'll have a Q&A with HR people and culture professionals from regional technology companies to talk about hiring strategies during the pandemic and strategies for attracting, growing, and sustaining a healthy, diverse, and productive workplace in the future. We hope that you'll join us throughout the day. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Jim Cook. Jim, everybody, welcome. I thought it'd be great if maybe we could start by if you'd be willing to just share a little bit about kind of your background, your journey through the Silicon Valley tech ecosystem, and from there we can get into some questions. And I'd like to encourage folks from the audience, if you have questions, just throw them into chat, and I'll try and work them into the moderated Q&A as we go.
Sure. Hey, thanks Skip, and hey, thanks everybody. I know Portland well. I love Portland, as some of you know. I've been 30 years in Silicon Valley primarily, but trying to make my way up to Portland more longer term, because I just love the area. But just a quick background, will be very brief, and then we'll get into questions because I think that's where the fun starts. I started my career at Intuit in 1991. I was about, well, I started before that, but my first real Silicon Valley company was Intuit 91. We were about 100 employees. By the time I left in 96, we were 3,000 employees. I was a 25-year-old kid. I was the first report to the CFO there. And I learned a lot, because as you scale a company from 100 to 3,000, from one product, a set of functional departments to business units, you just learn a ton of lessons along the way. Some M&A along the way. I was the person who had to write the S1, the IPO document in 93. I had to lead the M&A, several M&As on the finance side. I didn't know how to do any of this when I started in 91. This was trial by fire. This was learn along the way. I feel lucky to that respect, but I did learn it, and I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm an entrepreneur innovator at heart. I joined one of the first e-commerce startups in 96. Internet shopping network. Nobody really knew what e-commerce was at the time. There were only 3 companies. Amazon was doing books. CD Now was doing music CDs, and Internet shopping network was basically the Fry's Electronics, or the computer version of selling anything related to a computer. Home Shopping Network owned it. They sold it a year and a half later. And I got a call from one of my colleagues at Intuit saying, we have a crazy idea. Can you vet the business model? Because we want to jump into an e-commerce startup. And you're one of the few people we know who's an e-commerce expert. That company was Netflix. That was 1997. There were six, I was one of the first six, what I call founding team members there. And the idea was to ship DVDs in the mail. For those of you who remember the red envelope, I was a big factor in helping to create that, all of finance and operations. Not the Netflix you know today. Netflix you know today is all about streaming all the time and this huge, gigantic company. We were a small, little, scrappy startup trying to figure out how to disrupt Blockbuster. There's some fun documentaries on it now. We won I think we won something at the Lone Star Film Festival for Best Documentary. Netflix versus the World. I would encourage you to see that. They only show it on Amazon for some obvious reasons. I don't think Netflix likes to see the original story, but it's a true story. And it's just been fun along the way. A couple books. I'll skip over a few others, but one of my other great companies that I was lucky enough to join was Mozilla in 2005. We were 18 people. And again, helped scale that company to about 1,200 people. And this is where I got to know Portland really well, to tie it all back to Portland, because a lot of the founding engineers and especially DevOps people came out of the Portland area. And we found a concentration there of just incredible talent and opened our first office there. I believe, Skip, in 2012. I'm dating myself, but I think right in the brewery blocks, right in the brewery blocks area. And then Skip, you and John, who's on the call, helped guide me around the business leadership of Portland, which I didn't know much about at all, and I just fell in love with the town. So there's my quick background. And there's lots. I'm currently CFO of Orbital Insight. We're a geospatial analytics company. I guess I love to do hard things. Been here about 2 years. Our founder takes computer vision, takes all the satellite imagery from space when he founded the company and throws computer vision algorithms at it to do all sorts of analytics and insights. And we've morphed into geolocation and all sorts of sensors of the earth. So, our founder's vision is to see what's happening on and to the earth in real time with any sort of sensors and make basically a Google search engine for the earth. It's really, really, really big idea. So I'll pause there.
Well, definitely exciting. And it's also been great to, kind of follow your trajectory over the years. And as I've gotten to know you more, it's like you've been at the front row of a lot of sort of Silicon Valley's evolution over the years, which I think presents you with an interesting perspective, because as we've talked about before, a number of other sort of tech ecosystems around the US and globally have tried to emulate what happened in Silicon Valley over the course of the last 2 to 3 decades. And it was in part an organic sort of evolution, and other ecosystems are trying to figure out what's that catalyst to get things going. How do you kind of shape and inform growth going forward? And I'm really appreciative you were willing to spend some time with us today, because as you know, like Portland, among other places, is trying to figure out kind of what comes next as it emerges from the pandemic. And as you and I have talked about in the past, Portland and Oregon more broadly, one thing that's exciting about it is it's still growing, it's evolving, it's becoming whatever it's going to become. And now we have a chance to kind of shape that in some way, shape, or form. And I thought what would be interesting is today to talk a little bit about your perspective, being based in the Bay Area, looking back at Portland and how things have changed since you've gotten to know it over the last almost decade. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm also wondering, just in terms of the pandemic in particular, what are some of the things, you looked at while at Orbital Insight? And I'm wondering sort of what's changed in terms of how you all have looked at where you open offices, how you invest in people and offices going forward coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I know those are all great questions and insights. I'll start off with a few theses. Like those who know me, I come up with these theses and I try to pattern match. And a lot has changed, Skip, over the last several years. But I've been, so we opened up offices in Portland as one of our first. As you mentioned, we opened up offices in Berlin and London and Paris. And I learned a lot about opening offices. But what it comes down and I've been asked to talk a lot on this subject because the history of offices, the history of, let's just start with offices, but I'm going to morph it out more to kind of culture, right? I said once at one of these panels, and it stuck with me, and it seems to stick, that I came up with the phrase that space creates culture. And what I was talking about at the time was office space, because this was in the kind of the history of office spaces, where office spaces, for those of us who are older, used to just be this corporate environment, right? Up until about the early 90s, offices was a very corporate environment, high cube walls. And I remember in the early 90s, Silicon Valley, Intuit said, hey, we're going to have this thing called Casual Fridays. You're allowed to wear jeans on Fridays. That gives you a sense of kind of where we were in the early 90s. We're allowed to wear jeans on Fridays. I mean, really, right? The corporate office was still a major thing until really, the dot-com, I would say the 2010 period was this exploration of, hey, we should have more open space. And all of a sudden the cube wall started coming down in that 10-year period. And there was this exploration of, should we have some fun spaces inside the building? But that really took off to campuses. And then kind of was culminated in the late, 2010, 2020 in this WeWork phenomenon. I'm giving this history because, back to space creates culture. It's not just for offices, right? So you asked about Portland. I think this is how humans think about their homes, their neighborhoods, their towns, and their cities. I think if we can actually apply this concept of the space that you create around you creates the culture, it's a good thought model for how to design getting people engaged and connecting. Because I think the other theme is community wins, right? I learned that really deeply at Mozilla, that the community around the Mozilla developers was the powerful invisible force of 25,000 volunteers writing code for Firefox. And businesses have learned that creating communities of users, creating communities of developers, creating communities of customers wins. And I think cities like Portland have figured that out long ago, but maybe haven't pattern matched it, that just this sense of a community is what makes people engaged and wanting to show up there. So I think those are two thought models: is what space are you creating and why? Is it a space where people want to show up? So, I'm happy to open this up for questions, but just one more thought on this is, and we've seen this during the pandemic, right? We've created this new space called Zoom or Teams or whatever, video. And it's a space where we're now working. And it's a space where things work well, but it's clearly a space where things don't work well. And if I had to pattern match it, like, I don't have any answers. I just have more of this thought process that if I had to figure it out, it would be, what we're trying to solve for is work, just actually doing work for the company, your role. And we're solving for this wholly other thing called relationships. So it's this thing between work and relationships, which organizations and companies have been trying to intersect since I've been in the workforce. And so when you go back to this history of, oh, we need to create these open spaces, that was an attempt to create more team-like environments, and they kind of blended them together. And what you heard in these open spaces was, I can't get my work done. It's too noisy. And you had all these technologies like, okay, let's put the workspace over here. And so we've been trying to bundle work and relationships as two separate streams inside an office for years. And if I had to make a prediction, I think COVID has taught us that these are two separate things. And I think we're now going to unbundle work space and relationship space. And I don't think we've realized it yet. And I think this hybrid work environment is here to stay. And I think some teams want to desperately get together in an office and work on a whiteboard. Other teams are more individual contributor, and they just love the kind of the Zoom environment and tapping it for meetings. So I think hybrid is definitely here to stay. But how do we now unbundle workspace? And the workspace could be Zoom, but people may prefer offices. And when they're in an office, and then relationship space. And in that relationship space, we're talking the old school, offsites. Remember when we were all in offices and we couldn't actually have a relationship. So what did we do from 1990 to 2010? We had these things called offsites. We have to get out of the office to actually have a relationship with our team. Isn't that interesting? Mozilla did a bunch of all hands events to bring everyone together because we were so distributed. And we had one in Portland. We brought 1,200 people, 1,800 people to Portland as an all hands event. Well, we were solving for relationships there. So I'll pause, but those are just some thoughts around your questions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot of profound thoughts there that there's a lot to unpack. So if companies approach this like relationships versus work sort of dichotomy in kind of a binary way, have you found that over the last year, managers and other folks, even working with your team specifically, that you found that there needs to be more blending and more frequent relationship building and focus on the part of companies? It can't just be a single year long or a single 1 day or 2 day offsite or a year. It has to be like weekly, daily. And what are some ways that you all are kind of trying to at least think about the issue, if not actually taking some steps to address it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been more deeply in this than most over the years just because of my experience opening offices, but I'll still say that I'm still trying to figure this out. But it does come down to awareness. So when you asked about managers, this awareness that certain people need different types of a workspace and other people need different, that there is no one size fits all answer, and everyone's trying to fit it into that. You heard Google say everyone has to come back to the office, and then that completely backfired. And you heard then Twitter say, or maybe others say, we're just going to close our office and everyone can work from home and we're going to be remote forever. And they're like, well, we think we want to bring people back to the office. Now it's optional, right? And so humans try to fit this into a one size fits all kind of thing. And that's not, the awareness is you need to bring people together on the daily. This is how we work every day, daily, weekly, monthly. What do teams need to feel connected to their other team members, period? Maybe it's a Zoom call touching base. Maybe it's going out and get coffee. Maybe it's bringing that team together in the office or in a WeWork kind of environment. Whatever it is, you have to satisfy the needs of the people, which is what Space has always tried to do, but just being aware that you need to create different opportunities and it's not a one size fits all. But it definitely has to do with engagement, daily, weekly, monthly. And that has to do with just what your practices are. So work practices are going to change. I'm convinced, right? Work practices are going to be, we talked about a lot at Mozilla as we had always between 35 and 40% of our workforce remote, what we called remote back then. It's still called remote. But we had a lot of thought process around, and we issued some internal, and even some external blogs that really trying to change this framework that we are all remote. We would title it, "We Are All Remoties," right? What does that mean? When I did the stats on offices over the last 10 years, even in offices where people would come in and they were assigned to the office, it never got above 60% of the people in the office ever. Why? They were on business trips. They were on vacations. They were attending a conference, right? And so when those people were at those events, they were still emailing, they were still using their cell phone, they were still communicating, but they weren't in the office. And so people were like, oh, we need them in the office. It's like, well, we realized that 40% of people are never in the office, even when it was an office environment. So we need to design our work practices so that we're all remote, and we think about remote people first, in my opinion. And so when you get into a conference room and people are back in the office, you actually address the people on the Zoom call first. You make sure they can see your documents first. You make sure you read their chats on the screen first, and you don't forget about them, right? So this is how we're going to have to change our practices. And the companies that do this really well are going to be way ahead of the game, because people are really going to enjoy working there, because they're going to feel seen, and they're going to feel like they're part of a team and not feel like they're remote. When you ask a remote person, what's it feel like to work at a remote company? And their answer is, I don't feel like I'm remote, you know you've done it. When the answer is, yeah, they forget about me on the call, or, you know, I don't get quite the communication, you know you're not quite doing it right. So it all comes down to your day-to-day practices, really.
No, that's a great observation. I was talking to a CEO of a local company that has folks around the country now, and they've grown quite a bit. And he said that as they were returning back to work, he was called out by one of his employees when he used the term, we're going to use our offices as collaboration space. And she was like, wait a minute, I've been remote for a while. And she's like, one of the things that I've appreciated is that there is a level playing field. And if you're telling me that I need to be in the office to be part of a collaboration space, that's unfortunate, because I'm rarely going to be in the office, and it's kind of a hardship to get there, right? And you're asking me to pay for it. The company's not paying for me to get to the office. And so she's like, from an equity and inclusion standpoint, I'd prefer if you called it maybe like co-working. So it's a chance where you can access office amenities. But to your point, Jim, this idea of critical business processes in the room where decisions are made, you need to make sure those are kind of remote first if you're going to have remote employees, because otherwise you're going to feel disconnected from that. And I thought is a really interesting observation. So they changed all of their vernacular and how they refer to what they're doing in the office.
Language is so important in this, and what we have to remind ourselves as leaders, the leaders who are communicating these things, is that all of our decisions. So you said a very important word there, decisions. Your credibility as a leader and your Glassdoor rating comes down to communications. And guess what? Communications are rarely face-to-face in companies. And so if you think about what communications are, they are a remote first way of saying what you're doing and why you're doing it, how you're doing it. And the language you use around remote communications, because it's an email, usually it's a Slack. It's not, you rarely get everyone together in an office and communicate effectively. And even if when you try to do that, the people that weren't in that meeting don't feel communicated to, these are the kind of practices that we know work, right? Even in the office environment, we know people are on PTO, we know people are at events. We better write this down, and we just need to get better at it. Remind ourselves that we're always communicating to remote people. And so this language it's like, absolutely. I think the better question that CEOs are now grokking around, or HR leaders or anybody in operations, is instead of saying we are going to create a collaboration space, you need to change the question. How would you like to collaborate? Now I feel engaged, because I'm not being told what to do. I'm being asked, how would I like to do it? Just that reframing will get people. I mean, and what is this all designed for, by the way? So if you really boil it down, it's really designed for attracting and retaining talent, period. We're all competing for talent. We're all competing for the best talent to have the best workforce. Are people going to want to come to our company because we have a good reputation? And are they going to leave the company because of the language you use and the practice we use? Yes and yes. And we forget that as well. And attrition and talent retention and turnover is costly in so many ways, not just money, right? Not just in recruiting the next person, but in, knowledge walking out the door, in culture, right? And so these are all the practices for creating a great culture.
One thing I've always appreciated about kind of your philosophy on tech businesses, but also from a financial perspective, is your definition of success is not just we save money, we would cut costs, but rather sometimes you need to invest to actually achieve a really interesting business outcome or an impact or create great culture. And I think what you've just said completely underscores that. I'm wondering if you would say that there's advice that could be given to companies, especially founders, who often might get enamored with this idea of, well, we don't need managers, right? Before the pandemic, it was this, there were companies like Valve and others that were like, we save so much money, and managers, they're just kind of superfluous, right? It's just, it's overhead. And not too many companies have succeeded long-term and scaled without having effective managers. How would you say like the pandemic has changed that? Is it now coming out of it that we need managers now more than ever? Because to your point about relationships in some of these new spaces that are virtual, it's even more incumbent that we have people who are savvy at relationships and outreach and proactiveness.
Yeah, this is the logical fallacy once again of this is how human beings tend to think in a 1 and 0, a digital binary format. That's just not reality, right? We don't need managers, or we need a manager for every 10 people, are both wrong, right? What you need is leadership, period. I don't even like the word manager. What does a leader do? They make sure they have the best people on the team, and they're communicating the strategy. They're establishing the resources for the structure, and they're ensuring people execute. And how do they do that? Through communication. So if you have leadership and you have communication, someone's got to do it. Call it whoever you want. Someone needs to be establishing the strategy, the vision, making sure they gather the right resources, the right team members on the bus, and making sure you execute your promised milestones. Call that a project manager, if you will. Call it a program manager. We found leaders all throughout Mozilla when we were very flat and undistributed. They didn't need to be a manager. They just need to be a leader. But it's all about making great decisions and communicating great decisions. So again, I would really encourage all CEOs to reframe the question of, we don't need this or we don't need that. What are you really solving for? You're solving for leadership and communications, period.
Yep, that's great. I was wondering if we could shift a little bit to, you've got some interesting perspective also kind of gathered at the aggregate level from some of your involvement with BenchBoard and the Alliance of CEOs. And I'm wondering, are you seeing any variation among some of those inputs in terms of different types of companies, sizes, in terms of how they approach some of these questions?
Variation on how they approach these questions? Surprisingly not. Even the biggest companies, Google and Facebook and Apple, are struggling with the same questions and the same concepts as a 50-person company, as a 500-person company. And I think they're struggling with how to connect with people. And the companies that are good at connecting with people then put their systems into place and their communications into place that feel good or don't feel good. I don't think that has to do with the size of the company. I think that has to do with the language of leadership, right? The decisions that are made and whether you really feel like they are the good decisions or the easy decisions. See, the good decisions aren't easy. In fact, they're tough. And being able to tell people, I don't know if this is the right decision, but we're going to go down this path and hopefully shoot 80% on goal. And 20% of the decisions I'm going to make as a leader are going to be wrong, because that's just by definition. Like, if we knew everything perfectly, then it wouldn't be a tough decision. And we're going to course correct. But this is the way you have to lead. We're going to try this direction. Here's why we're going to do it. Here's what we've considered. But have a clear point of view. Have a clear point of view and tell people why, and then how you're going to do it, and defend it. And if it doesn't work, say, you know what? We knew there was a 20 or 30% probability we're going to have some bumps along the road. So here's how we're going to course correct. Right? This connection of decisions with results is another logical fallacy, right? It can be a good decision with a bad result. It can be a really bad decision with a lucky result. We correlate results with decisions all the time, and it's just like, no, decisions are bets, right? There's a great book. This is just top of mind. There's a great book that I would really encourage people to order. It's from Annie Duke, poker player. And she wrote a book called Thinking in Bets. I think it's just brilliant. It really is about decision making and how there is no right decision.
So to put a finer point on that, what you're saying is essentially, decisions are bets. They can be risky, but effectively people need to be thinking about the execution side and being sort of self-aware enough and retrospective periodically to say, how was the execution? Did we make a good bet and execute poorly? Or did we make a bet, a lucky bet, and it worked out in the end?
Right.
Yeah.
And being authentic and vulnerable enough up front to say, we might be wrong, or it might be unlucky, right? And have a culture that has the company not blaming the executives for making that bad decision, because its correlation of decisions and results are not correlated. Sometimes they are, but they're, as you delve more into it, you'll realize that's not the case. And so having the culture, having the company, give the decision makers a hall pass because, hey, they told me that there was 20% probability that this might turn out bad. It was a good decision and you hit the 20% probability. So we're going to make the same kind of decision, but we're going to course correct this time.
Yep.
And odds are that it's the right decision. And then have the execs, be authentic and vulnerable enough to say, we think this is an 80% decision. We think this is a 70% decision, but there's always 20 or 30% that we could be wrong. And if we're wrong, here's what we're going to do about it.
Yep.
That's great leadership. But here's what it requires. It requires a point of view, a very clear point of view about where you're going and why. And see, that's the problem with a lot of, I know I'm being preachy here, but that's the problem with a lot of these decisions is people don't want to take a decision. But strategy is a clear set of decisions of what you're choosing to do and specifically what not to do and why and how, and then putting structure and execution behind it. So yeah, what you just framed up on strategy, structure, and execution is exactly how I think about leadership.
No, that's great. I mean, what are some thoughts there related to that? Is things have changed a bit over the last year. We've seen some social unrest. There's issues with remote teams in the pandemic, and trying to, as executives, connect with people and kind of meet them where they are. That goes for employees, that goes for customers, even broader community stakeholders that might now have an interest or sort of are paying attention to what a company is doing, a brand is doing. And I'm wondering to what extent either you've experienced this or with the Alliance of CEOs or BenchBoard, where you've seen an increased awareness and attention by executives to sort of what's known as stakeholder capitalism, and how they're approaching, how much is enough in terms of getting these inputs and providing opportunities for folks to feel like they're shaping the direction of the company, versus at some point a company needs to make a decision. And usually that's by the execs. And then it's like, all right, everyone, this is what we're going to do. Everyone fall into line and we'll see how it goes. So I'm wondering, is that one of the top issues that you're seeing? Is there some tension there among the group?
There continues to be tension in this exact, whether you call it stakeholder capitalism, investor, capitalism, or just the community. This is a partnership between your employees or the community and the investors, but you cannot let any one side of this equation rule the roost. You cannot have the executives being completely disconnected and only maximizing for the board or for investor outcome. The employees get upset, or even investors. And alternatively, you cannot have a set of employees or a population in a town tell you what to do all the time, because they don't have all the facts. They don't have, those are good ideas, but what you need to say is, we heard you, we understand these are the desires, but now it's a bit of an education on, here's how we're going to take what and the community is, the crowdsourcing decisions is very smart to a point, as long as they have all the assumptions and inputs that they really sometimes don't have. But then you have to defend, well, we're actually solving for this at this company, we're solving for this angle, that angle. Here's where we're going to take your desires, and here's how it fits. And here's why we're not going to do what you want us to do, because here's the outcomes that you're not understanding. But being very open about that. They want to feel heard. People want to feel heard. And they're okay if you make it, they're actually okay if you make a decision against what they want or against the community wants, as long as you tell them why and how it connects. and they love being educated. I do this all the time with my finance teams. Like, here's how P&L works in all my companies. And I go line by line and I open the books up, and they're just like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Oh, that makes me think, oh, now when you tell me I can't have my kombuchas at $5 a drink, I'm not mad anymore, because I understand that $5 a kombucha in my open space times 10 open spaces is costing us more money than we should be paying. I'm not mad anymore. Now I'm educated. But if you don't go down that path in these decisions, then they're like, oh, my company's not giving me kombucha, they suck. It's like, guys, it's $5 a drink, right? Those kind of things.
Yep. So it looks like we got a question in the chat from Mark Gregory. He says, does Jim have suggestions for public organizations that struggle to be competitive with private sector wages to attract and retain talent utilizing hybrid work cultures? And are these strategies different given often slower adoption to remote work cultures in public organizations prior to the pandemic?
That's a very loaded and great question, but I think it starts with, and I'm reading it again, public organizations that struggle to be competitive with private sector wages to attract and retain talent. I would say, as a public organization, my first reaction to that, Mark, is public organizations need to understand, and we touched on this earlier, they have the capital to actually compete with private talent. They have to decide as a public organization whether we're going to invest in our people first or our profits first. Honestly, that's the decision. If you truly believe that people drive your profits, then you shift your investment to people and you don't shift it to profits. And the companies that have done this in the long term, especially public companies, stay around for years, and the public companies that don't are out of business in 10 or 15 years. Because people and teams win, and you have to treat your people like your number one investment. And once you flip that switch as a public company CFO, then you can de-invest in other non-people related stuff, and you can mix your pot, but you can say, we're going to have a strategy of maybe offering better benefits, right? Than something that they don't all cost money. Like at Mozilla, I introduced a program that one of the first programs, and I got all the data on it. This is back in 2005. I said, we're going to pay 100% of the benefit cost for every employee. There is no copay. Everybody thought I was crazy. Why did I do it? Because I couldn't compete for talent with base salaries, but I could pay $1,000 more per employee on benefits. And the reward I got from that one decision, it cost me $1,000 per employee, right? 1% of an average $100,000 base salary. I'm just using raw numbers, right? I hear, oh man, I took the offer home and my wife thought that was amazing. And, and just the fact that you guys would do that is amazing. I've never heard of a company doing it. And I'm like, I don't know why other companies don't do it. Today, you wake up and people are using benefits as a way to compete for talent. There are many decisions like this, and it's not about money. It's not about base salary. It's around training. I would encourage people to put training programs in place. We're going to $2,500 a year to go to a conference, or people will join a company for those kind of investments, not because my base salary is $85,000 a year, but I'm getting a $90,000 a year. No, keep the base salary $85,000 a year and give them training, give them better benefits, invest in different ways, and people will stay with you. And you'll recruit it without those people leaving to those private company startups, because they have a great culture. And when you can recoup it, when your retention rate goes down, and you will see it, you get that investment back in ways that are unseen. You don't have to hire as many recruiters. You don't have to spend so much money on recruiting. So, a great investment gets ROIs elsewhere.
Awesome. Great question, Mark. And thanks, Jim, for that. So I wanted to shift a little bit here. And, obviously in the Bay Area and other West Coast cities, there's plenty of issues that impact economic competitiveness over the past year. Portland has also experienced its fair share of everything from natural disasters to the pandemic to social unrest to you name it, right? Houselessness issues. I think as we look at sort of that next stage, we need a comeback story in part And there's also still a lot of great things happening here right now that haven't necessarily gotten their airtime. And so I'm wondering what's your perspective in terms of what you're seeing among your network of execs in the Bay Area and maybe other parts of California, and how are people looking at sort of their respective cities and how this focus on the broader community bears upon a company? You talked about it right at the beginning, right? There's the spaces we create define culture and define companies, and that's true of where those companies are located. So what are some of the things that you're seeing there from your perspective?
Skip, this is such a softball question. I know you know me so well. I could probably talk for half an hour on this. And I don't think the companies are thinking about this the right way, but I remember you and I talking about this 10 years ago and others. I think cities like Portland have an opportunity here like never before. And so here's the thought model I was thinking about just this the other day I'll just say up front that I am distressed by what I'm seeing in Portland, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to get into politics very much, but it comes down to leadership. We've talked about it. Portland has the talent. They have an amazing community. At least from the outside, I haven't been there in 18 months, at least from the outside, all you're seeing is kind of a lack of leadership and a point of view of what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. That requires leadership in defining what acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior is. I'll just stop there, but people need to feel safe. And people feel safe when they trust their leaders. And when their leaders are proactive with a clear point of view and a clear strategy and a clear structure and execution, even if you disagree with it, they're fine because they understand where people are coming from. When leaders are reactive and try to be everything to everyone, you see what happens. Oh, we can't upset them. We can't upset them. No, take a stance. I'll just stop there. But the thought model going forward is, and I thought about this in terms of I don't know if you guys, everyone remembers the Amazon headquarter contest. I'm going to call it a contest, where Amazon 2 or 3 years ago put out a contest that we're going to have all these cities compete for being the Amazon headquarters. I don't know if Portland competed in that or not. I can't remember. It was the winners were, yeah, Skip,
They were out pretty early, but yeah, they did make an attempt.
Okay, so
yeah,
that's good. It's called learning.
Right.
Here's the thought model. Let's create a thought model of where would be the best cities in the world to create a hybrid work environment and why? And what would the RFP for that look like? And how would I market that? And if I think about Portland and some other cities like Austin, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a huge opportunity to market. We are the best place in the world to have a hybrid work environment. Not everyone's going to come into the office. Not everyone's going to work from home. What better city to have like this mix of community and diversity and and you can work here, and we've got the infrastructure, and you can play here, and you can have a real neighborhood. It's like, own it. Take a point of view. Say we're going to be the best. I haven't seen any city do this yet. We're going to be the place to work for hybrid, and here's why. Bam. Own it, market it, and take a point of view. Because I think that would be my suggestion. Because I think if you can do that, that'd be really exciting. Some city is going to do this. Some city is going to figure this out. Come work here, and here's why.
No, I think you're exactly right. We have a lot of the infrastructure and amenities that would make that attractive. It's just a matter of packaging it up into a narrative and getting it out there.
And the reason I put it into a thought model of just imagine that Amazon sent out another RFP, but now it's not Amazon sending out the RFP, it's the world asking for it. Change Amazon to the world. The world wants this. And no one's actually offered and said, here's our RFP for you, the world. Here's how to think about it. It's going to take an investment, just like you invested in answering the Amazon RFP, but invest in it. Learn something, change the communication, course correct. You're going to get 80% of it right and 20% of that communication wrong, but you're going to move the ball forward because that's the kind of people that Portland has always attracted. They've always attracted this, work and lifestyle balance company. There is no better time, right? And that's been the ding on Portland, by the way. Let's be very honest. 4 years. Oh, it's kind of a lifestyle city.
Own
Great.
it.
Own it. And there's no better time to own it right now because that's what the world wants. We've realized that. So you're probably in the best position as a city to own the strengths that you always had. There's my pitch.
All right. Calling the mayor right after this discussion. Say, I got an idea for you. Actually, Jim does. So as we think about sort of the state and Portland, you mentioned sort of this sort of marketing or branding. Here's this sort of where we want to be. Here's how we're defining our future. What are a couple other things that you think would help position Oregon as sort of a leader in the innovation economy? So attracting remote hybrid work, that's one.
Yep. The technology community that people don't realize exists there. So really, the hybrid work environment, back to community, not just a community of the great events and wine, the beer, which you've already got, but the community of tech. And here's how we're going to weave together the community of tech and get you together with like-minded people. Did you know that these people were here? Did you know that these people were here? Right? And you and TAO sit in that intersection of community. Mm-hmm. But if you can solve that community, it's like, oh my gosh, I can belong to that network and I can belong here and I can get together, and just creating some sort of glue behind these otherwise companies that don't know much about the area, saying, here's how we onboard you. Right? Yep. You almost have to think of onboarding companies like you onboard people in an organization. Mm-hmm. Let me introduce you. I mean, you guys did this for me really well. Let me introduce you to this person. Let me introduce you you got to do it. But you have to do it at the company level too. And let's get your DevOps team together with that DevOps team. Down to that level. People are like, this is great. Because I think I'm trying to do that now in Silicon Valley with CFOs. I mean, I'm building my BenchBoard CFO network on the side because of this very reason, that the CFOs in Silicon Valley just don't even have their own network. And I'm like, what? We have these informal networks, make them formal. I mean, even the best, even the most busy and or deemed best kind of people trying to do this are still way behind in the sense of community. So that's one. Community, hybrid. I don't know. I would try to take a page out of Vegas or Austin or others and just have the city invest in conferences, event space. So getting people just to the city for a conference like Moscone Center or Oracle, what Sun World, or used to be Sun World, Oracle World in the city, and then they get to experience the town because the conference was held there. That's going to take money and investment, but once they see it, they'll be like, "This is great," and then you can subtly market to them. Look at all these anyway.
Yeah, well, it's great. I mean, we have a strong tourism and hospitality sector, and I think as we talked about back in 2012, we're both old, the O'Reilly Open Source Conference, and how that being in Portland attracted global open source leaders and software developers here for years. And many of them eventually said, I can work just about anywhere, live anywhere. Why not Portland?
Right.
And that enabled some of the growth that we saw, over the last decade. That's a great observation. So, we've got just a couple minutes left. I wanted to see proactively if any folks had additional questions they wanted to throw into chat. And let's see here. Nope, doesn't look like it. But I did want to follow up with one final question, which is, you've definitely been visiting Oregon quite a bit. So when are you actually going to move here?
I don't know. I was very close, I think, in 2017, as a few people know. But then I ended up leaving Mozilla and staying down here and finding a job. So I think it's we'll see how this work from anywhere thing goes. Maybe I'll get a house up. Maybe I'll change my own frame of reference. And I would desperately love just to have a place up there, even if I'm not living there full time. So because I think this is the new world of how we do things. I can have a house here, I can have a house there. It's gonna take an exit or two, but we'll see.
Nice. We definitely like to hear that. And so any final words to kind of wrap us up here, Jim? Final words of wisdom?
No, just be brave, own it, invest in the things that you want to invest in, and have a clear point of view. I think we talked a lot about leadership, but a lot of this comes down to leadership and communication. The language we use is important. Why you make decisions is important. And it's all about community, and space creates culture. So just the one word wisdom is space creates culture. Create the spaces that you want to create. Design them the way you want to design them for the people that you want to design them for. Whether it's your office, town, neighborhood, or city, you can do it. I mean, we just have to remember how to do it.
Yep. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation, Jim, and I know that a lot of our members will too, and we'll be distributing this out asynchronously to a number of folks in the coming weeks. So thank you for taking time to join us. I know you're really busy. And thank you to everyone who joined us live. And to those of you who will be watching this from the comfort of your homes or while on vacation, camping somewhere in Oregon this summer. Again, a huge thank you to JLL and to Facebook for underwriting the series. And we've got a couple more programs coming up later today. We hope you'll join us. And also a shout out to Ruthie and Kara for their help in today's events. And so with that, it's a wrap. Thanks, Jim, and everyone for attending. Have a great day.
See you guys.
Thanks.